Well, tonight, a family is calling for justice after a man dies in a Charleston jail.
Today, for the first time, video was released showing what happened inside that jail. 31-year-old Jamal Sutherland died January 5th of this year after being tased multiple times inside his jail cell.
He was in jail after an incident at a mental health facility which led to assault charges. His family spoke to reporters today saying both the mental health facility and the jail failed to treat him properly given his condition.
That was a great man, and I'm going to leave you with that. Jamal Sutherland was a great man. And there are some people that know they need to do things, and they're not doing it. So I ask those of you who knew your part in my son's murder to do the right thing. Please do the right thing. Mental illness does not give anybody the right to put their hands on my child. That's my child. I love my child. His brother and his fathers, they love Jamal. Jamal was good. I had 16 surgeries. Jamal never left my side. Even when he was going to the mental hospital, he wanted to make sure that his mom was all right.
Sutherland was booked the evening of January 4th. The next morning, officers wanted to get him out of his cell and get him to a court hearing. We're about to show you video of that incident that his family says led to Sutherland's death.
In that video, you'll see the officers try to talk Sutherland out of his jail cell and tell him to lay down with his hands behind his back. Sutherland sits down with his hands behind his back and then tells the officers that he won't lay down. And that's when they enter his jail cell. The video you are about to see is incredibly disturbing.
Loosen up. Loosen up, officer. Hey. 37.
You can hear him crying out in pain as he is tased several times in that video. The video goes on to show officers handcuffing Sutherland. Again, they drag him out of that jail cell. Medical staff later came in to check on him. It goes on for several minutes before CPR is attempted. The two officers involved in all of this, they were placed on administrative leave. Sutherland's family and their attorney say deputies at the jail knew of his mental illness since he was picked up from a mental health facility. His family tells reporters more needed to be done to take his illness into account.
There was nobody in there to talk to him with any compassion, to try to reason with him, and to let him know what was going on. If they had brought in somebody that maybe was neutral, that was not an officer, maybe a mental health person, could have been a nurse, somebody that was less threatening, they probably could have de-escalated that situation. But that didn't happen.
Well, a short while ago, the Charleston County Sheriff held a news conference to discuss this case. She took office the same day of Sutherland's arrest and says changes have been made at the jail.
What you've watched on these videos is not easy to watch. Unfortunately, in our line of work, we see it all too often. There were directives in place at the time that the detention centers acted upon those directives. And one of those directives were they were forced to go to bond hearings. That was their directive. That was their policy at the time. Since that time, since that day, I have changed that policy and no longer allow forced bond hearings. Residents can absolutely refuse their right to a bond hearing. I want to be clear about that.
The sheriff went on to say that the jail has also stepped up efforts now to try and get inmates their medications, and they're looking at their use of force policies. State
Senator Marlon Kempson is proposing a bill on how law enforcement officers deal with those who have a diagnosed mental illness. Kempson was at the news conference today and spoke about that proposed legislation.
Mental illness is not a crime. All too often, we find ourselves in front of these microphones having to deal with challenges that, quite frankly, law enforcement ought to be adequately trained in crisis intervention.
Kempson says that he has spoken to Governor McMaster and several low-country law enforcement agencies about his policy proposal.
As we speak of the governor, McMaster released a statement on this earlier today on Twitter. He says in part Sutherland's death is a tragedy. The video reveals issues in training, procedures, and policies in law enforcement's encounters with those suffering from mental illness. The governor goes on to say that Sutherland's mother has challenged us all to learn from her son's tragic death, and we will do so.
The White House press secretary spoke about this incident as well today, saying President Biden is calling for police reform to happen now.
I can't speak to the specifics of it given there's an investigation, but what I can say is that the president's focus and belief is that police reform is long overdue, that far too often communities of color are living in fear and are exhausted by the threat and the possibility of being in harm's way, and they should not feel that way.
We're going to continue to follow this story. We'll have an update later tonight on News 19 at 11.